Well, good morning. This is going to be a very old media presentation. I come from a magazine, as you've just heard. I'm not going to use any slides on multimedia. I'm wearing a suit, and I'm just going to talk. I don't know what it says about The Economist that the thing that got us most excited a few years ago was an episode of The Simpsons. Homer Simpson gets upgraded to first class by some catastrophic failure in the airline system, I think. And he and Marge are sitting there, and his proof that he's in first class is he picks up a copy of The Economist and says, "Hey, Marge, I'm in first class. I'm reading The Economist." And he turns to her and says, "Did you know Indonesia is at a crossroads?" And in the weeks that followed, all of us tried to get crossroads into our title as often as possible on our stories, which I guess we're a slightly strange bunch. My point, though, this morning is that the world really is at a crossroads at the moment. That when I was asked to talk about what world the Generation Y will inherit in 10 years' time, it's not just that, as Yogi Berra says, never make predictions, especially about the future. It is, I think, that this moment in time is an extremely important moment where real decisions have to be made, and the decisions we make now and over the next 2 or 3 years are going to really fundamentally alter the sort of world that we look forward to in 2020. And it's not a matter, I think, of Generation Y waiting to see what kind of world it inherits. The challenge I'm going to throw out this morning, and I think it's a challenge some in Generation Y are addressing, is that they need to actually get ahead of shaping that world rather than waiting for it to come into their hands in whatever form it turns up. Now, 9 minutes, and I've already used nearly 2 minutes of them, is not long to talk about this, so I would say I have 2 books where I address these themes: The Road from Ruin that's just come out, that Scott mentioned, and in a previous book called Philanthrocapitalism, How Giving Can Save the World. Please look at those. Please look at my website, roadfromruin.com and philanthrocapitalism.net, and you can follow me on Twitter at MattBish, where MattBish, where I address these issues. But the start of my new book says that on September the 15th, 2008, capitalism as we knew it came to an end. It came to an end, as we say, just around the corner from here, where Lehman Brothers had its office, and Lehman Brothers went out of business. I believe that day will be a defining moment, because it's the moment where we had to realize that the version of capitalism that we had, although it had tapped into some enormous creativity and generated vast amounts of wealth, and in some ways had made the world more prosperous than it had ever been before, that it had really serious flaws, that there were not just toxic assets, but toxic ideas at the heart of the system. And the challenge we set out in the book is, how do we improve capitalism so that we have both those wealth-creating aspects, but also a sustainability in the capitalism that actually allows it to really clearly work with the grain of social progress rather than against it. In some ways, Goldman Sachs and the difficulties that it's having at the moment are indicative of the kind of problems that are out there. Here is in many ways, best-of-breed company that the world has ever produced. The challenges that anyone wishing to get a job at Goldman Sachs has to go through. They're great people, by and large, in terms of their career achievements, and yet they do not get how the world has changed. They do not have a message that taps into the public's demand for capitalism to show that it can raise its game and be on the side of social progress. Now, I think those companies that do tap into that are going to have a chance to do much better over the next 10, 20 years than those that don't. And that's one of the challenges we set out in the book. They'll do it by tapping into the values of many people who want to actually, in their work, feel that they're on the side of improving the world, and people who want, as consumers, to know that their products are actually contributing to a better world rather than destabilizing the world. I think that one of the things that was revealed by this moment of crisis on September the 15th was that there was an obsession with short-term measures of what matters, the share price, the short-term profits, at the expense of any serious consideration of whether rising GDP actually was consonant with a better society, and whether higher profits were actually sustainable profits, whether the higher share prices were actually going to last. We need a whole new revolution in how we measure things as a society. And we need all sorts of other reforms to make our system more long-term orientated, to allow that innate human desire to make a difference and to make a better world to actually have a proper play in our capitalist system. Now, the reaction, I think, over the last 18 months to this crisis has revealed a far deeper crisis, which I want to challenge you with this morning, which is that our democratic institutions have failed to respond to the crisis by actually improving capitalism. They've actually resorted to a traditional pattern of denial about the extent of the problems, a desire to go back to business as usual, a great wish that consumption will pick up again, even though we know that consumption was based on really unsustainable behavior by many people in our society. And I think that reveals a really fundamental issue of problem in democracy, which is that there is massive financial and economic illiteracy. I think the challenge fundamentally for democracies is to raise what it means to be a citizen, to be an engaged citizen, to include actually understanding how economics and finance works. One of the most interesting people I've interviewed today, recently in the context of my book, Philanthrocapitalism, was Pete Peterson. Pete Peterson was the founder of Blackstone, the private equity firm. He's 84 now. When Blackstone went private, he made $1 billion or more, and he's dedicated his money, he's giving it away, to try and promote fiscal responsibility in America. A heroic challenge, I think. But he says that the biggest problem out there is that the young, the Generation Y, do not care about the coup d'etat that is effectively taking place, where the older generation are stealing the family silver and leaving huge financial bills to be picked up by the next generation. And he's behind this commission that's now, the bipartisan commission that's now underway in Washington, to try and actually put the fiscal position of America on a sounder footing. But I think there's a real problem that unless Generation Y and the next generation after that really understand the kind of financial problems that they're going to be bequeathed by the older generation, we're going to have huge economic problems over the decades to come, and we're going to be faced with a world in 2020 that is incapable of addressing the challenges that are out there, whether they be climate change or poverty and the pandemic risks that are in the system, all those other things that can make our future look much less optimistic than we should be looking forward to. Now, the other positive note, though, which I write a lot about in Philanthrocapitalism, is that there is, I think, an awareness among some of the leaders of capitalism that there's a real choice to be made. There are two visions of capitalism we can have. One is where the rich do get richer and they consume, they have lots of luxury goods, but they're largely indifferent to the social consequences of that. Or there's a philanthrocapitalism, a capitalism that engages with the challenge of building a better world. And I think there is a growing movement out there of the wealthy and the people who wish to be wealthy, the people who wish to really be successful in their lives, to actually build that better capitalism that works with the grain of society. One example just to finish on, last night I was at a meeting of a group called Echoing Green. Echoing Green was set up 20 years ago. It's, I think, the pioneer of venture philanthropy, finding young people with great ideas for changing the world and actually funding them to do that. I heard a 90-second pitch from a number of people, all in their 20s. Anna Elliott of Bamyan Media, who's making reality TV shows in Afghanistan to teach people how to be entrepreneurs. Ashley Monot of Enzi, who's trying to create a lending scheme to allow people from poor countries to borrow to go to school in America and give some of their future income as the collateral for the loans. And a really interesting guy called Scott Warren of something called Generation Citizen, who's trying to get ordinary Americans from public schools to actually engage in the political process. He says, are we going to be the selfish generation? Are we going to be the quiet generation? No, we're going to be Generation Citizen. And he's starting to change that world. The key point is that it's not just people with bright ideas that are coming out and offering these different models. There is, I now believe, the infrastructure in place, starting with organizations like Echoing Green and working all the way through the political process, the White House Office of Social Innovation that's been created, that mean that people with bright ideas for changing the world can now be identified quickly and get the capital and other resources they need to scale up and really have massive impact in the world. That is the main reason I'm optimistic. And my challenge in concluding this morning is to say we are at a crisis point, but there is the potential for those that want to engage to actually build a better world in which we can have both the prosperity that anyone marketing to the rich wants to have, but also a sustainable society. And I urge those of you that are thinking about the future of branding and the future of companies to get on the side of progress, to work with that philanthrocapitalism movement and to build that better world. Thank you.